Okay, I'm starting now, I hope. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to welcome so many people to the first of our sessions this term of various different forms of continuous professional development today on the IPQ. As you know, we've introduced new specifications for CE for first teaching this September, and I know many of you have signed up for those, and I look forward to seeing you at other sessions later in the term. The sessions are worth attending, even if you're not so interested in different subjects, because they are designed, the common entrance specifications, to be new and different and to embrace the approach that we have brought now to that exam. And the IPQ has been designed to complement the changes that we're making across the board. It's a real opportunity for exciting learning through real research. The IPQ can be undertaken in subject timetabled or homework time, in off timetable time, like after the common pretest, or in the summer after exams, or after CE itself, or as a co-curricular activity or enrichment. The key thing is that it allows pupils to ask a question that interests them, to research the answer, to amend the question perhaps in the light of the research, to reach conclusions and to present those in whatever form they wish. It could be an essay, it could be a podcast, it could be an artifact, a PowerPoint presentation, a performance, whatever. And crucially, it's the entire process which is assessed, and the output is only one part of that. It's great fun as well as very stimulating. We could have done none of this without the contribution of Dr. John Taylor, who's the Director of Learning, Teaching and Innovation at Cranleigh. He's a renowned expert in project-based learning who breathed life into our ideas and provided the framework which has led to some of the exciting research projects that you're going to hear about, which are being undertaken in a growing number of our schools. I'm enormously grateful to him, and I'm in awe of his commitment to this really vital area of learning and teaching. But before he leads us through this evening's session, it's with great pleasure that I'm going to hand over to our new CEO, Julia Martin, who's going to say a little bit about how she sees the IPQ.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much, Darrell. I think probably for us, the IPQ is one of our most exciting products. It's definitely designed as a complement to CE, and what it does is it aims to give pupils a recognised qualification that explores skills that go beyond traditional exam-based assessments and the process of independent investigation and not just the outcome. So what we're hoping to offer is a framework for schools to encourage children to study anything they would like to, whether that's answering a curious question, showcasing skills and talents in art and drama, creating a new thing, starting a business, championing a cause or a prominent person. So before I hand you over to Dr. John Taylor, and again, as Darrell said, he really has been the driving force behind this, and he's going to tell you much better than I can everything there is to know about the IPQ and project-based learning. I had one slide, and it really demonstrates the gravitas better than I can, which is the idea, as Einstein said, that learning Dr. John Taylor. Thank you.
Extremely well, I'm really going to just take a few minutes now to amplify on what was implicit in what you've said, and to echo your enthusiasm. I think this is a tremendous opportunity for all the schools involved in with the ISEB IPQ. Let me just say a little word or two before I take you through some of the points about implementation, about how I became involved. I guess this is going back some 20 years with project-based learning. My own background had been in university teaching, and I moved into secondary school teaching some 20 years ago. And I think what struck me then was the way in which so much of what we practice in the classroom is shaped by, and understandably shaped by, the constraints of assessment and the ever-present pressure of examinations and the need to get the right answers for the right results and so on. And over time, I think what that creates in the minds of both teacher and student is a perhaps not fully articulated model of what learning is, namely that learning involves getting the right answer, where the right answer is the one that will get you marks in the next exam. And my subject background is in science and philosophy, and I've always felt that the most exciting and valuable lessons are the ones where we go, to some extent, in the opposite direction by asking questions to which there is no obvious right answer. So I teach physics, and I noticed that if I were to drop into a physics lesson a question about the origins of the universe, the possibility of alternative universes, or the mysterious nature of time, these questions are being open-ended, controversial, ambiguous, and patently ones to which there's no clear right answer. They act as a sort of catalyst of thought and stimulate discussion, excitement, interest in the classroom. And really the question that left me with was, how can we capture that and build on that? And where can we take it if we're going to look to turn this exciting conversation into the starting point of a journey of inquiry and of learning, perhaps even to the point of having something we could assess. And hence the move for me into project-based learning, because par excellence, projects are the way to assess and to teach and to assess questions where there is no obvious right answer, where the idea that the student comes up with could be better than anything I've thought of yet, and something which they can develop for themselves with support from me, the teacher, acting as a mentor and as a guide, rather than as the authoritative source of all the correct answers. So I mentioned this, I don't want to elaborate too much because time is precious and we want to get into practicalities, but I do think it's of significance because we need to bear in mind that none of the children that come to projects will come as blank slates. They will have in their minds, even from a young age, a tacit model of learning whereby they will be expecting us to be providers of right answers. And so we need to challenge that. We need to unsettle them a little bit. We need to start exposing them to the challenge of exploring and addressing and inquiring into questions where it's not clear, where two people may have equally good answers. And that for me is the starting point. And as you're going to see, this is implicit in the model of learning which underpins IPQ. Okay, so here comes my first Chris Whitty moment. Laura, could we go to the next slide, please? That's lovely, thank you. So as I've intimated, learning happens in projects through a process of guided discovery. And I use both of those words advisedly. I think it is about discovery. It is about the child taking charge and beginning to find things out for themselves. And one of the most wonderful moments are, of course, when they come back to us with things that we didn't know, which they've discovered for themselves. But discovery-based learning, project-based learning has its critics. And one of the criticisms that's made is that the attempt to replace traditional instruction with a process of free discovery can be inefficient. It can place too much of a cognitive load on the child, and it can lead perhaps to a form of learning which is trivial and shallow. Now, you may be surprised to hear that I would accept some of those criticisms because I've never advocated the model of unguided, complete freedom in the classroom, what sometimes perhaps unfairly parodied as the lazy teacher model, where the child takes charge and the teacher goes and puts on the kettle. It's fairly obvious that that's not a productive way to learn. And that's not what IPQ is about, and it's not what any of the more thoughtful advocates of project-based learning really want to say. Now, what we advocate is a model of guided, directed, facilitated learning, a model in which we teach the child to be independent. Independence is not innate, it's an acquired skill. and it's acquired through a process of carefully structured, guided, directed inquiry, in which we may be at the outset quite directive and even giving instruction in the skill set, the processes that are needed for successful project work. But over time, we become supporters, and eventually, of course, we might become the audience as the child takes more responsibility and eventually takes the stage with the findings of their work. So keep that in mind as the trajectory. That's the model, and as I say, it's one in which teaching matters. It's not a question of unguided free discovery. In more concrete terms then, what IPQ looks like in the classroom. So we've designed IPQ as a significant sized project, 15 to 20 hours, something that could typically be taken over the course of 1 to 2 terms. We also think that IPQ, as I've suggested, is best undertaken in conditions in which it's possible for there to be significant teaching support. This is not something just to give to children to do over the holiday. Even capable students need help to develop, and many students don't have the skills that are needed to tackle a significant piece of project work, which, as we'll see, has a structure to it and assessment criteria and so forth. So teaching matters and curriculum time matters. And I apologize to those of you who have to marshal all the resources of your teaching staff and formulate them into a timetable and are thinking at this point, how are we going to do this? The simple truth is that's an important challenge and one that we do need to address. Now, there are various ways that can happen. We'll look in a moment at some different slides which suggest what this looks like in detail. But very briefly, we think that IPQ could be taught alongside your existing curriculum. If you already have a space on the timetable, a slot where it's possible to squeeze another subject in. It could also be that you teach IPQ by means of the subject teaching of another subject. So, for example, it could be dovetailed in as part of an IT lesson or within an RS and philosophy class. A third possibility is that you actually look at one or perhaps even more than one of your subjects and rework them using IPQ as the framework and as the mode of assessment. So, for example, you might want to consider the possibility that some of your humanities subjects could lead up to and be assessed through IPQ. So, there's no one size fits all. There's no right answer here, but it is significant and it's important that we think through timetabling. And I think that's a message that in a few minutes when I hand over to our pilot teachers, I think that's a message that will come through loud and clear from what they say. I want to emphasize one other significant feature, and that is that IPQ is not just an essay. Many students will produce written reports, and wonderful they may be, but we were quite determined that we would try to capture within the framework of the qualification the same breadths of potential and skills that lies in our students. And some of them are budding young academics who would love to write at great length on scholarly topics. Others have other interests, and if they are keen to develop in the sporting, the performance, the dramatic or creative mode, then we want this qualification to have something for them. And I want to emphasize very clearly that we don't think here in hierarchical terms. There's no sense in which the default is the written project and these other options are sort of derivative. Each of these is a valid and potentially rich mode for project learning and inquiry. Today our focus is not on assessment, but let me just make one remark, which is that we do think that assessment matters. We do think that it gives status and significance and credentials, if you like, to the course if it leads up to a recognized qualification. And for IPQ, the model that we've chosen is to have essentially teacher assessment. So you will be supplied with marking criteria, exemplification of standards of response, the sort of standard apparatus of teacher standardization. And through a training exercise on an event similar to this, you will have the opportunity to gain accredited status as an ISEB accredited project moderator, and on that basis to award grades for your pupils. So I won't say more about assessment. I mean, that's a big topic. You may want to ask questions about it, but we will be coming back to that and offering further training. So I've got about 5 minutes to go, and just the first slide down. So let me move through, and we may not get through all of them, but I'll try to condense down some key points just to, at this point, start to create, at least in your minds, a sense of the architecture of IPQ, if not to add all the colour and detail. So we've built a framework, as I've suggested, for the qualification. And the framework is meant to support both teaching and assessment. I'm a great believer, actually, in frameworks, in scaffolding and in structure. I don't at all see this as antithetical to open-ended creativity. Frameworks help. They help students to know what they're doing, then they help teachers to know what they're doing. And they also help with one particular challenge that faces all project learners, and that is the management of time. I mean, if we're asking children to work over the course of perhaps 10 to 20 weeks on a single piece of work, that's a substantial challenge. And it's very easy in the process to go off track or to lose momentum. And one thing that helps enormously is if we can divide up this large, potentially large period of time, divide it up into sections, and effectively to manage the process a little bit for the students by giving them goals during each of those sections. So this model here of the fourfold pathway of defining a project, researching and reviewing, discussing and developing, and then reflecting and presenting. This is designed to help to scaffold work for both the child and for the teacher. It's also the framework of assessment. So each of these stages has a corresponding set of assessment objectives. I won't go into them in detail now, but you can see already that there is the idea here is that there is at the highest level, there's a broadly comparable framework and a broadly similar pathway that all the children taking a project course follow. And this has enormous advantages for you if you're keeping tabs on 20, 30 students, each going off in their own different directions. It means that we can move them through, perhaps having 4 or 5 weeks to do some research, and then another 4 or 5 weeks to do some development of their own ideas in response to what they've researched. And at each stage of that process, you can then provide general guidance and instruction about the requirements of these stages, even though each of them may be working on very different projects. Okay, next slide, please. So I've already suggested that there are different options for timetabling IPQ. And I do want to emphasize yet again the importance of finding a space for this as part of our taught provision. It's a challenge, it's a challenging task. There will be some students, but only a few, who could manage this without the supportive structure offered by a regular timetabled lesson. So that's one challenge to be mulling on, I think, as we get started. How are we going to fit this in? And there are options there, as I've suggested, in terms of the integration of this within frameworks that we already have in place, or the creation of alternatives. Next slide, please. I've mentioned that the project is a 15 to 20 hour project, and that it's going to be extended over a period of time. The options there that fall out quite naturally are to consider a 1 or 2 term model. And as with so many things with projects, there's no right answer. There are advantages either way. The 2 term model gives you a slightly more leisurely opportunity to have some exciting conversations initially, to explore ideas, to not rush the process of choosing a title, the all-important process of choosing a title. Equally, one of the important features for successful project work is the maintenance of momentum. And for some children, the idea of having a project drag out over 2 terms is perhaps a bit daunting. So there's something equally to be said for getting moving, getting going, getting up ahead of steam, and doing the project in 1 term. So I think here the simple answer is there is no right answer. And I've over the years experimented with both ways, with a leisurely program spread over, in some case, more than 2 terms, and shorter, more condensed programs. And there are pros and cons, something to be said both ways, but it's a factor to consider. Thank you. Next slide, please. So as well as there being no right answer to the question of how long it should be taught over, there's also no right answer to the question of who should teach it. There are, I guess, broadly a couple of models, one of which is that a teacher, perhaps you, if you're keen enough to come in the evening or to an ISEB PD seminar on this, perhaps you're the person. One teacher who gets really zazzed up and keen and ready to go, and you're the one who then gets the task of supervising everybody. More commonly, perhaps, and hopefully as IPQ beds in, there will be opportunity to bring in colleagues from different disciplines and different subject areas in the school. So again, it's no right answer, but worth thinking through what you're going to do in terms of your staffing. I'll just make a couple of points here. The first is not to be afraid if you are a single teacher having to supervise quite a wide range of projects. Don't be scared of that. It's a daunting thing if you find children starting to explore topics that are not your area of expertise, but it's possible. And it's possible because the project is a process. And fundamentally, what we're trying to develop is skills in managing a process of development of and research and development of ideas, review, a personal process which can be done in all kinds of different subject areas, but it is still fundamentally the same process. So you will find over time that you have the opportunity to grow in confidence as you embrace the options and the possibilities here. But equally, if you do have colleagues around you, it's great to build up a team so that there is expertise, and this would be particularly important if you're looking to embrace creative avenues with artifact or design projects or performance project work. In these cases, I think having expertise to draw on is going to be particularly important. So again, no obvious right answer, but consider your staffing model carefully. Think through who you can bring in and think how you can build a team around to support the core lead teachers. Good, thank you. I'm conscious time's ticking away. I don't want to take too many more minutes because I'm very keen to bring in our pilot teachers. But let me just say a few more words briefly on the remaining slides, if I may, before we hand over to the pilot teachers. So could we go to the next slide, please? I think we've got, hi Laura, are you there? Okay, we're just monitoring the chat here. So let me, at this point, I think I will in fact just cut to the chase. The remaining slides just cover a few basic points that are you can follow up if you browse through the specification or the teacher guide concerning a little bit more detail on the assessment framework and points about management of group projects. All this is interesting and important, but material that you can keep for future reading, I think. So now I think is going to be a good opportunity for me to hand over to colleagues who've piloted IPQ. I don't know what your views are about qualification development, but I've always felt that qualification development works best as a hands-on experiential process. And it's been a privilege for me to work over the last 2 or 3 years with colleagues in a range of schools who've been piloting IPQ. And so without further ado, I'm going to ask them to speak a little bit about their own experience. And then if time allows, we may, and the technology permits, we may discuss amongst ourselves a little bit about the messaging that you're hearing, because let me warn you already that you may not get a fully consistent message. As I said, we're a broad church, and there's no single right answer to many of the questions of project implementation. Okay, so we're getting a little bit of lag. Are we, Julia or Laura, are we ready at this point for me to bring in Sarah? Okay, just while we set that up, let me just make one further remark about one phase of the project process, which is significant, and that is the choice of titles. This is the part of the process where clearly it's going to be important to help children to go in the right direction, but at the same time we don't want to oversteer. So the way I tend to approach the choice of titles is by having a series of questions in mind, which they form, if you like, criteria for good titles, and they can form the basis of a conversation that you could have with a child who's beginning to frame and formulate a project idea. So as I've suggested, it's enormously important that the title is an open title, that there's a question chosen which is open to exploration with a range of different ideas. This, by the way, is as important for practical projects as it is for written essays. If you're doing a practical piece of work, making a video, producing some drama, how you do it and the evaluation of alternative possibilities is a very significant part of making a rich and interesting project. So when titles have been chosen, I think a certain open-endedness is enormously important. And the other features are, in a way, completely obvious. One of them is simply to ask the child if they're really interested in what they've chosen to do. Interest, enthusiasm, motivation. The IPQ is all about giving them the time and the space to follow a question, to pursue a challenge which they find genuinely, intrinsically interesting to them personally. And it's important because, of course, over the course of 10 to 20 weeks, they're very unlikely to maintain momentum if they don't have a significant personal interest. So looking for something that really is their thing, their area of interest, is enormously important. And the final point is not to overcomplicate it. They need to pick something which is tractable, accessible, manageable, something that they can meaningfully research with the resources that are at their disposal. And really those, to me, are the core criteria for a successful title. So keep those in mind as you're beginning to think through how you would go about implementing the project process and what it would look like to support students. Okay, so you probably guessed I was filibustering a little bit as the technology caught up with us. But it's great privilege now for me to hand over to 3 of our pilot teachers who very kindly agreed to give up part of their evening to talk to us. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves and to say how they've developed work on projects and what lessons they would offer to all of us. So in no particular order, as they say, over to Sarah first of all.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I work at Cranley Prep School and I've been working with John Taylor for the last nearly 5 years. And we first started with the FPQ project, which was designed really for secondary school pupils in years 10 and 11, and sort of adapted that to suit our year 7s and 8s. And that sort of progressed. And now we are working on the ISEB IPQ model, which, you know, has been fantastic. And the way we run that is through English lessons. So we have it timetabled, and I would strongly advise that you do that, because initially when we first ran the FPQ, that was run by several teachers, each teacher looking after 4 or 5 children, and we didn't have set teaching times. And that was problematic. It really was. So now we deliver through English lessons by English teachers, and we deliver that in year 7. So every child in year 7 will do the IPQ for a term. We do that in the Michaelmas term because it's the longest term, and they have a set program that they follow, and we have 2 teachers in each class. So we have 4 year 7 classes and 2 teachers each. And those lessons revert back to English lessons after the Michaelmas term. So we use half an hour, 35-minute lesson a week plus 35-minute prep. And that has worked really well. Whether we have worked with, the sort of scholarship groups or the groups that needed more help, we found that it was ample time. And it's quite good to have that tight time frame. I mean, as John said, we've experimented with, doing the project over the course of a whole year, and that seemed to drag on, and the children lost momentum. And it was, a little bit onerous, but actually it's so much better to just have it all done and dusted within a term. And I'll just share the screen with you and just show you what we have done here in terms of the information we give the children at the start of the course, and that helps guide them on what needs to be covered at every stage in the term. I'm not sure if that's showing there. So they get basically a little booklet and they get the schedule. So we start by introducing them to using Google Docs, which I strongly recommend again doing that because they can't lose the work. We used to use Word document and that was a disaster. So, towards the end of the course, they'll say, oh, I've lost all my work, or I've lost my memory stick, or it's disappeared. But with Google Docs, actually, it doesn't. So that is really great. And in terms of, finding the research material, again, it facilitates that and makes it so much easier. And then we go on to how to choose a topic, looking, how do you form a valid question? And you have the teachers there. So if we have 20 children in the class, then the 2 teachers, they'll take 10 children each in terms of supervision, but the work is led by that main teacher who's assigned to that class. So it's really great. And if one teacher's not there, then the other one can pick up. So it has worked really, really well. And then we look at how they write an introduction. That works, in terms of having it delivered in English, in terms of developing the writing and the reading skills. That has worked really well as well. And then we talk to them about how to conduct research using the library. So it's not just internet research, looking at summarizing and paraphrasing, and then developing questionnaires and interviews. So that takes about 6 weeks. And then after that, the remainder of the time is conducting the research and providing that feedback and support to the children in the course of that term to help them accomplish their work. And by the end of it, what they do is they present a written report, and that's all, it's done as a research paper, so they have to definitely reference where the information has come from. We talk to them about plagiarism. They're not allowed to just copy and paste. They have to put the information in their own words, and that really helps in terms of developing their reading skills and understanding. And they present a bibliography at the end of it, and then they do a presentation. So the last part of the project, the last 6 marks are for the presentation, and we encourage them to present to the class, and that develops their speaking and listening skills. So all in all, actually, it's a really great way of complementing a lot of the things we teach anyway, in our lessons. And that's all I've got to say, really. I was trying to stop sharing and the mouse is not doing what I wanted to do. Okay, there we go. There. So that's it. That's me done.
Thank you so much. Sorry, we're just
something disappeared all of a sudden. Yeah. Okay.
That's tremendous, and thank you very much for sharing so practically. And that really helps to make things vivid in terms of what this looks like week by week in the classroom. So splendid. Thank you. I know you might have to shoot off, but and so if questions do come in, we'll try to get to those before you go if we have time to. But let's go now to Lauren. And Lauren, do you want to talk us through your experiences to date?
Sorry, I've been speaking into fresh air. My name's Lauren McCallister, and I teach at Shrewsbury House Preparatory School. When we decided to be part of the pilot school, my first thought was, how on earth are we going to make this work? Where are we going to weave it in? And how are we going to achieve this in a way that gives us the opportunity to allow pupils to develop? And I think the first thing you've got to decide on innovation. Do you want to bring in any innovation, and how are you going to use it to complement with what you already do? Now, our school in Year 8 goes all the way to 13. We do common entrance, we do scholarship, and we feed about 20 different schools. So we've got a number of different demands, and it's not as simple as saying, right, let's do this with everybody, let's do it at this point. So we've got to be quite careful with how we brought it in. So what I decided to do was work together with some teachers to say, right, after our boys have finished writing the scholarship papers, which is round about now, let's bring it in. And so we brought it in last year with our scholars. And we started small. Don't worry if you don't have all the answers. Just think about starting with what you have, with where you are. Find a place in the timetable. With what I did was, I'm an English teacher, so I decided to use English. And I said to another couple of subjects, would you like to use a few of your lessons for this as well? They'll continue to do the work in your lesson, but I will oversee the project. And so we started really, really small last year. And I'd like to think about it as sensible risk. And I know that sounds like it is an oxymoron, but start small and see if you can risk a little to see how the boys develop. Don't worry about committing to the entire project. And one of my favorite quotes is, you don't have to see the whole staircase. Take that first step and think to yourself, right, let's get these projects off the ground. Let's see how it goes. And we might then want to register. We might want to register the following year. And I think what I'd like to think about looking at the IPQ, it's the independent project qualification, but I like seeing it also as an interesting philosophical question. And you see these pupils' minds start to percolate with all these wonderful ideas. It's a vehicle, it's a wonderful matrix which allows pupils to have the scaffold, and within that, this wonderful freedom to come up with their ideas. So often we think of the IPQ or common entrance as an either or. We must do common entrance, we must do this, we must do prep school baccalaureate. But the beauty of IPQ is that you can do it alongside something else, and you can do it as big and as small as you like doing. It's a hybrid, it's a complement, and see it in that way. What we did with Year 6, we've got something called project-based learning, which we're trialing at the moment. And so we started by looking at the Darwin. There was a ship that is going around the sort of the UK at the moment. And we decided to focus on that maritime situation with the Year 6s, and we did it over a term. And we said, right, let's work on something. And they looked at litter, they looked at pollution, they looked at dolphins, they looked at all sorts of things. So we started with a theme. So what am I doing at the moment? At the moment, our boys are almost finished their scholarships. They're going to be finished in a couple of days' time. And we started the IPQ round 2. In other words, Year 2 today. And so what I saw happening in class today, we introduced the whole topic. I did the PowerPoint with them, and the boys are starting in the defining stage. What topics do I really want to include? And so today somebody was speaking about maths and architecture. Somebody was looking at genome sequencing, and somebody else was looking at black holes and all sorts of different ideas. Last year, somebody looked at the importance of performing arts during lockdown. Somebody looked at what would happen if we removed meat from the UK market. And it's those kind of little things. And we don't have it perfect yet, but we found place for it. We're doing it small. We're tinkering with it. And the results have been pretty extraordinary, because these boys just enjoy having that wonderful freedom to explore, but within a scaffold, within a matrix. And before you decide to take a red or a blue pill, it's exactly that. Exciting new toddler wire questions absolute intellectual candy and something I love doing. So I really enjoy doing this. If you don't know where it's going to fit in, if you don't know how to do it, start small. I do this over 5 weeks, and I say, right, we're starting with 3-4 days on the definition. We're going to spend some time on the research. Part 3, which is the discussion and the development, could be a website, could be a podcast, could be a video, and then the reflection, and then the presentation. If you start small, and if you don't worry too much about getting it perfect the first time, you'll do something magical. So from me, I love it.
I mentioned, sorry, I've just been on mute, I think. Yeah, sorry. So I just really was wanting to express thanks to Lauren for sharing it so inspirationally, and how encouraging it is that at a point when we're just getting started in terms of the national and international rollout of IPQ, that we've got these stories and these experiences to hear about and to draw upon to inform our own thinking, and to give us confidence that this is very workable and very manageable, and really does make a difference. So mentioning international links, I'm going to bring Will in now, and hope our slightly laggy links across the world through cyberspace hold up. Any geography teachers on the call who can work out from the ambient light that Will's in a different line of latitude, I'm very impressed if you can work out which one. But over now to Will to introduce himself and explain what he's gained from doing IPQ.
Is that better? I hope you can hear me. Very good afternoon. Yes, as John said, I'm at the Banda School in Nairobi, and we were faced with the prospect at the end of August last year with another term of remote learning, which we weren't expecting. The UK schools were opening up, and so we decided to take the opportunity to start the IPQ. We felt it really lended itself to remote learning. And I would encourage those of you who are contemplating it, that it is something that can work really well in a kind of blended learning setting. So we decided to take the plunge and do it with the entire cohort of year 5, 6, 7, and 8. And we gave one lesson a week to it. There was a co-curricular lesson previously that we took for the IPQ, and it was led therefore each week by the form tutor, which was a risk initially, but really interesting in that all the teachers in the school had now been through the process, and therefore we feel that's many of them would have confidence doing it again in year 2. We decided, like Sarah, to do it in the Michaelmas term, so do the project from September to December with the presentations in January. We felt that leadership from the senior leadership team was really important, and I would encourage you to if you're not on the leadership team, to get the head and the senior team very much behind the project, so that it's not something that you're battling for sort of curriculum time with. We produced, similar to Sarah, using Google Docs, a weekly calendar and resources. I very unprofessionally did a short video on the skills that were needed, and so that the form tutors had at least sort of 5-10 minutes at the start of their session. They could show the children the video, and an element of standardization as well, so that the children were getting the same message. And then through the term, rather like Sarah showed, we worked through the different phases of the project, and using Google Docs and the VLE very much for sort of pupils to share their progress. I'm going to share a couple of pictures just to illustrate my sort of take-home lessons. I hope that you might be able to see that. I think what I've learned, we made so many mistakes, so do be encouraged if you're nervous or if you've already encountered problems. We made lots of mistakes over the course of doing the project. So I'll try and illustrate the lessons we learned. The first, and as John's already stolen my thunder, the question or the title, it's really, really important to spend a good amount of time on that. And I wouldn't be in a hurry to move on to the research stage until you're confident that the children you're working with or the children in the cohort have got a really interesting and, as John said, a sort of an open question with an evaluative element. Too many of ours started with a big project like dogs or tennis or the history of football, and there wasn't that evaluative angle, and we weren't quick enough to identify that and to shape and to support the children in shaping that title. We did get there in the end, but a bit of precious time was lost. So that having a title that's a question, a challenging question which invites different approaches is really good. The second thing I think I learned was that the project is the process. Many of the children sort of settled on a PowerPoint presentation, and that very quickly became their project. It was how well they were going to present in front of their peers, whatever topic it was that they were investigating, and it gave them an imbalance, and they ended up really thinking that what they produced in that final stage of the project, what was the project. And the presentation is an important element, but it's a small element. As Sarah said, it's 6 marks. And actually what's really helpful is if they choose to do a presentation as their outcome, that there's a moment almost where they come out of role and they stop their presentation, whatever it might be about, and they then sort of reflect on their presentation in that later stage of the project, rather like a sort of an actor coming out of their role to talk about how they delivered their lines. That the children need to reflect on the process of the project, how they went about it, the different stages, the difficulties, the things they encountered that they weren't expecting. So if they can sort of move away from seeing the final outcome as their project and actually see the whole process, then they're much more effective, and they do meet the marking criteria of the higher band. And the pictures at the bottom again just illustrate that. If you're doing a project, for example, on what's the best way to learn to paint a portrait, the project isn't actually the portrait, although that will be a wonderful part of it. The project is actually the whole process. The learning of the different ways that you might complete a portrait, the different colours, the dimensions, the perspective, and really encouraging the children to see that as what they're doing, process rather than outcome, really help them. I thought I'd just finish by showing you, sorry not to be a bit more technological, but this is one of the projects that our Year 8s produced, and it is the Beautiful Birds of Nairobi, and it's actually a book, and it's a beautiful book which highlights the different species of birds that can be found in the Nairobi National Park, and I show it to you because it really encouraged us, as well as a number of other projects, to take a big risk I mean, we did it with a huge number of children, and we gave them completely free rein. Made lots of mistakes, weren't quick enough to shape the titles early on, but many of the children found it one of the most stimulating things that they've done. And the second thing I was going to show you, I don't know if this comes through, it's the second slide. I don't know if that's, there it is. It's a text message that this pupil's mother received from some of the volunteers who this book was given to. And I just show it to you as an encouragement that the projects have an end user. One of the most effective, successful projects have a life beyond the studying, whether it be a presentation, a book, a website. And when the children see that their work has a place in the world, you see those sort of light bulb moments, and the project turns into something that's good. It turns into something that can be quite magical. As I said, we have learnt a lot, many ups, many downs, but I would heartily recommend it, and wish you all the very best as you start on the exciting journey.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Will. That's really, really very informative. And as with all our pilot teachers' contributions, I think you've said an enormous amount to us all in a very short space of time. And there's much there that I would echo and find very helpful. So thank you very much indeed. We've got a few more minutes before we're going to move to Q&A, and a few questions have started to percolate through the system, but you might not be aware that I believe that you can ask your question by, if you're signed into YouTube, you simply use YouTube chat. I hope I've got that right. It may be that you're not you don't have visibility of the chat function now. Here I'm testing my own technological limitations. You might need to move the size of the screen or reconfigure. Julia, do you want to just come on mic and explain how people can go about putting questions in? Is that?
Hi, John. Can you hear me okay? Lovely.
Yeah.
Yes, for anybody wishing to post questions through YouTube, if you are signed into either Google or YouTube, you will see the chat functionality. For those of you that are full screen, if you just go back down to the minimal screen, you can type any questions in and we'll see them here. We've just had a really lovely comment for you, Will, from Zulika Abdul, who's just said amazing project from the Banda. So I think people are really enjoying seeing examples of work. So yes, if you would like to pose any questions, I can get them all here and I will put those either to John or the whole team, or any of us from ISEB can answer them too. But anybody having real issues with that, you can also email them through to us at inquiries directly, inquiries@iseb.co.uk, and I will make sure that John gets those for you.
Okay, thank you very much, Julia. Just before we then move into Q&A, I've got one project as well to share with you, which I'm just going to bring up now, if you'll bear with me. And so this in a way nicely contrasts with Will's project. I hope that's visible now to everybody. This, as I say, nicely contrasts in that this is a written project, an essay, and it follows the structure, the template, which is not mandated but suggested as a possible route through if you're reading through the teacher guide or the specification. And I don't want to go into all of it now, but I just want to draw your attention to perhaps two or three significant features of this as a piece of work. The first thing is, just without reading it, just to notice that it looks readable. It's been carefully presented, double spaced. This particular student has used headings and some of the functionality of their software to enable them to create things like a table of contents. They thought about font and details like numbering pages, all of which creates a good look on the page. And I think that's not a bad thing to keep in mind. Will was talking to us about the end user, and of course, if it's an essay, the end user is the reader. So coming up with something that is looking good and making the reader think, yes, I'd like to read this is important. A couple of other features just to notice. The title, it's one of those open-ended questions that we've kept talking about throughout the last hour. This isn't somebody who's just written an essay on the history of ballet. No, there's a question, and it's a question which really draws us into discussion, debate, and argument. And I think that's a significant feature for these projects, that we want to move beyond just gathering information, but to actually engage in argumentation, in deliberation, weighing alternatives. And the final thing I just want to say about this is, I appreciate you haven't got time to read it all through in detail, but it's a personal piece of work. I chose this topic of research because from a young age I've been passionate about ballet. Ballet has a special place in my heart. I've been dancing since the age of 4. So this captures what we've been saying again throughout the last hour. The project is a personal journey. It's your opportunity to hand to the children the chance to take something that means something to them and turn it into something really wonderful. So keep that in mind. As I say, there's more we could explore there, but I'm conscious we want to move on to questions, and I'm just using that to highlight one or two salient points. So at this point, we are going to move to dealing with the questions. So there's a raft of questions flying in, which is lovely. Sorry, it's a bit of a mixed metaphor there. A raft flowing in and a barrage flying in. So let's see if we can take this. Julia, you're probably better placed than I am to actually direct at this point these questions to me or to the rest of the team. We should just say thanks very much to Sarah, who's having to leave us now for boarding school duty. So thank you, Sarah. We're very grateful for your contribution.
So yeah, thank you to everybody sending them in. If I don't address anything, do just ping me, and I will make sure I make we get these answered. The first one is, can this be done as a group or as an individual only? And I think probably John, you're best placed to answer that one, just to make sure we get a thorough answer.
Yes, thanks. It's a good question. And the answer is yes, it can be done as a group project. That was, I'm afraid, one of the slides we didn't get to earlier. But if you have a look in the IPQ specification, you'll see that we've made group projects an option. And I think there are a variety of very obvious and natural contexts in which group work is exactly the way to go, particularly if it's a creative or performative project. All we would say is that when you're doing the group project, it's important from the outset to keep in mind that there will be an assessed piece of work at the end, and each of the group members will need to have their work marked and assessed against the criteria. So hence it's important that their individual contributions are tracked. And this is becoming easier and easier all the time now, as you'll probably know, on things like Google Docs. There's a version history tool which will actually show you who's written what. But a simple thing you can do is ask them to highlight or to work in different colors if it's a written report, so that you know who's done what. So just keep track of the individual contributions so we can credit them appropriately at the end. Obviously, as well, there's all the group work dynamics that need to be managed, making sure that they all contribute equally as much as possible to the process. But you'll be familiar with that if you've done similar projects in the past. The crucial thing is that we know who's done what for the point of view of giving them some marks at the end. Okay. So I can see it. The next question is, should we go to that one, Julia? Can the specification be made available online? That's really one for you, I think.
Yes, it is. So the specification is not currently available online because what we'd like to do is, we're in the process, we'd undergone the pilot. we're in the process of creating lots of resources, including teacher packs and pupil packs, so that you've got much more information, and all of that specification will be part of that. So yes, and if anybody would like to email inquiries at iseb.co.uk directly, I can make that specification available to you in the time it takes me to answer emails. If I get lots and lots, it might take me slightly longer, but we will make sure everybody gets, I've got some slides and some follow-up and some resources that can be made available to all of you after this meeting. So anything about resources, please direct to us and we will get that done. Another question that we did have that I know that I can answer before I hand a larger one back to John is about certification. Certification happens at the end. So what you do is you register your pupils. You would, and in fact, I can hand back over. We've got another question a little bit about marking. So you would internally mark, you would undergo the training with us to ensure that you are aware of how to mark. We undertake some standardization and moderation with you, which John can talk a little bit about. And we are going to run a follow-up event for those of you that would like moderation and standardization training. And then all of those marks come to us and we certificate your students individually at the end. John, actually, it might be worth handling some of those about marking in one. I've got a question that is how you might mark really practically based projects. So I know that we've had some really brilliant ones in the pilot, but for those where it's not essay based, what recommendations would you give, and what have you seen that's been really creative so far that might help give teachers an idea?
Good. So just on the mechanics of the process, as I've mentioned, we're working with a model which will be teacher assessed, but with an accredited moderation of the projects. And so what we're looking to do is to offer you the opportunity to join a moderation standardization meeting where we'll discuss in much greater detail the mechanics of assessment, the formatting of work, and the levels of response in the marking grids. Once you've completed that training, you then become an ISEB accredited moderator, able to go back to your school and to look at the work and to perform any moderation, following which we would then certificate the work. So in terms of a very practical project, I think what I would echo what Will said, and in fact we could ask Will as well to comment, I think, on this, because he has had some more experience of practical projects. The crucial thing is appreciating that the product at the end, whatever's been made, isn't itself the project. The project is the journey of getting to that end result. So we would need to see and expect the child to produce evidence of their ideas being developed, the research, the sources that they've looked at, the sketchbook maybe, or a slideshow showing the different ideas as they develop and as they emerge. Really important to show the thinking process. And we're not expecting that the practical work itself needs to be submitted in any form. Photographic evidence is good. Sometimes it's quite effective if they capture the journey using little screenshots or short video clips of them working. Really important to show the process and the journey, and to really remember that it's not just about producing something lovely looking at the end. It's all about the thinking that's gone on, the ideas and the decisions that have been made during that journey. And if you, when you have had a chance to look at the specification, you'll see that the criteria, they're very generic, and that they can apply equally to a student who's writing as to a student who's creating, because it's all about the definition of their ideas, the research they've done, and the experimentation and the evaluation of alternative ideas during the course of the project. So I mentioned Will. I don't know if Will's still with us and if the link's still good. Yeah, it's looking good. Will, do you want to come in there and just maybe, are you happy to say a word or two more about practical projects?
Yeah, of course. If it helps, I can give just 3 examples of some practical projects that were completed this year. A year 6 pupil did a stop motion video in which he recreated the Battle of Agincourt and told it through using his Lego at home. And he used it as part of a project. You know, can I use stop motion animation to engage children or people in his year group in history or in battles? And his project his outcome was simply a video. We had another pupil in year 6 who built a ramp for his mountain bike. So he called it, the name he gave it was a teeter-totter. So he designed it and he produced a very sort of engaging video at the end, demonstrating how it was used and how he and his friends enjoyed it. We also had a very strong promotional video campaign against plastic waste in the sea in the coast of Africa, and the outcome was a video, a very, very beautifully presented video incorporating web interviews with various campaigners across the world. It was extremely impressive. And to echo what John said about the process, I think if you see that the children are graded, the important thing is that they're marked or assessed holistically. So whether it's in the sort of paperwork they produce, the notes, the planning, or in their final outcome, the video, the website, the speech, or in their presentation of that outcome, they've got sort of three ways to demonstrate the requisite skills. So it doesn't matter if the paperwork isn't all perfect, and the child learns primarily by getting on and doing things, because they may well demonstrate in the practical production the skill, the kind of planning, organization, effective group sort of collaboration with others, and likewise if they're not very if they're very good with the paperwork and the planning and the organization, and yet very quiet and timid, and they feel very shy about presenting, they again can, they're not, the project isn't that presentation, so they can be rewarded for all the work they've done quietly and diligently at home on their own. So it's important to see, although there's often that sort of one standout thing that represents their whole project, they are assessed across the 3 different sort of parts of the project and can demonstrate the skills at any stage. I hope that helps. I hope that answers the question to some extent.
Yep, thank you very much, Will. That's as I say, once you've had a chance to just inspect the criteria, you'll begin to be able to make sense, I think, of exactly what Will's describing there in terms of a process and a journey, which we want to see captured in the final work as the basis for the marking. So I think we have a question as well, just keeping going with the theme about assessment. Julia, do you want to introduce this?
Yes, absolutely. So there are a couple of things. If I just mention moderation first. So we have a moderation training date that will be coming up, and I will ensure that that goes out to all of you that have attended, so that all of you know when that will be. So keep an eye out for that. In terms of assessment, what people are asking, John, is how we would differentiate assessment between years 5 and year 8. And one thing I will say just before John comes back in is that what we are aiming to do is roll out the IPQ for years 5 and 6 as well as years 7 and 8. So do keep an eye out for that. I'm aware that what we need to do is make sure we're producing lots and lots of content for all of you to engage with. So I can promise that that is coming. But yes, just a bit of a spoiler alert, it will be going out to years 5 and 6 as well. But John, differentiation between the years, have you got any advice for people?
Yes, so just to explain, at the moment in the specification, we've written the criteria in a fairly generic way, but we have said that the levels of response would be, so we would take, for example, the a middle band response to be the kind of level of work that you might see from a reasonable child who's in year 7 or year 8. So although it's not mandatory to teach IPQ at any age, we're using that as our sort of broad benchmark in terms of setting a standard. So at the moment, there is still the possibility of beginning IPQ style work with younger children in years 5 or 6. And at various points in both the specification and the teacher guide, we say that it might be appropriate to do similar but smaller scale projects. I mean, there are obvious ways with project work of taking down the level of challenge by, for example, making it shorter, or by perhaps making it more circumscribed, so that the teacher prescribes or recommends a series of titles from which the child makes a choice, rather than giving them a wider, more open choice of their own. So in these ways, it's possible to adapt the framework that we already have. And I would encourage you at the moment to be thinking of using years 5 and 6 as years for laying the ground, really, beginning to build the skills, perhaps trying a sequence of smaller project work pieces that could build up a kind of skill set, which is then carried forward into year 7 and 8 with the full IPQ. So as Julia said, we're looking at the possibility of producing some more guidance, so that there could be some assessed outcome that would be relevant to years 5 and 6 specifically. Good. Okay, so there's lots more to talk about. Julia, where should we go next?
Okay, so we have had a question. Would IPQ lessons in advance of launching a project be a benefit or a hindrance? I think that's quite a good question, but John, I think that's probably best handled by you.
Well, I will say a little, but if Lauren is still with us, if she'd like to come in as well, because she's will have, I think, something that she can add. Basically, I do think some stage setting is valuable. I used to do an awful lot of this with my students, and I still do some. I think it's fair to say I try now to embed more of the skills teaching during the actual course of the project work, just because it helps to build the momentum. But as I've said before, the skills that you need for success in projects are not innate skills. They are ones that are best taught. And so some activities, a few lessons where we're learning about bibliography construction or referencing, how to paraphrase sources, as Sarah mentioned, this is valuable as a starting point. And you don't want to go on too long, because you lose the excitement of the actual project. And many of the skills can be taught whilst we're flying, as it were. But some initial teaching, I think, has a place. Would that, Lauren, do you want to come in and comment on that?
Yeah, I think drip feed the enthusiasm. So we have 5 minutes at the start of every lesson, English lesson, that we dedicate to sort of silent reading. And my class is fascinated at the moment with behavioral economics. And so as we start reading, I'd be saying to them, right, okay, in about a month's time, we're going to be starting the IPQ, or in about 4 months' time. The question you've just asked me here, save it. That is an ideal question to explore later on. So certainly through their reading, get them enthusiastic. I've been drip feeding different things by saying to them, right, what we're studying in class here, that question, save that. That's a beautiful idea. We're going to be developing that. Or the question that you've asked me now and how we're answering it is going to be the style of what we're doing. So I've been really encouraging and drip feeding a whole lot of little sort of breadcrumbs to try and encourage them, to show them what's coming next, so that they start scaffolding. And then when we launch it, it's almost like it's here.
That's super. Thank you. Thank you. That's I think drip feeding that's a very apt metaphor, and it's something I've found increasingly. The styles of learning change as technology changes, and I now I've captured almost all the guidance I provide to my students in short 3 to 5 minute little video clips, which is I think more by accident than design, turns out to be about the right length. So. He says, having talked to you for the best part of an hour, maybe we are a generation where the attention span issue isn't quite the same. Good. Okay. That would be a good opportunity, I think, have we time for 1 or 2 more, Julia? I'm conscious time is ticking away.
Yes, I think we definitely do. There's a really good one here. Bear with me. This one's from Fernwelch. How might you integrate primary data collection into the project at school, or would it need to be home-led?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah.
Yes. So we do want to encourage investigative work, and primary data collection, if it's possible, could happen in a variety of ways. So the first thing is, I think the first thing to say is keeping it simple is always advisable, and as with any science, thinking through all the issues of risk assessment, etc. Obviously, so I think I put an example into the teacher guide of a crystal growing project where you might do a little experiment at school and start to get some results and some data. The other thing I think I would say is that there's a huge amount that can be done using some of the fantastic online tools that are available now. There are public data experiments out there where scientists are actually go and look at your webcam and watch the lions on the plains and count how many monkeys are in the frame. These kind of experiments are really very easy to find now and enormously engaging if you're a sort of child with interest in that area. So think quite broadly about where you can go. It doesn't have to be physical work, and particularly if lockdown issues come in, using some of these fantastic resources from around the world, or online simulations as well. There's some terrific tools that are available that allow you to do experiments virtually. But as the questioner suggests as well, experiments at home, provided that you're confident about the safety and so forth, perfectly valid way of getting data. All I would say is that with a project, it is, as I've said with the creative projects, it's all about the thinking process. So we want to get data by all means, but we don't want to spend 15 out of our 20 weeks watching the shoots grow, as it were. We want to get into the point where we've got some data we can actually do something with, think through, create some hypotheses, test the hypotheses, do some analysis. So just balancing up really the amount of time it might take so that the data collection is part of the process but not the entire thing. Okay, I think we might be to our final question for now. I should say as well that we apologise we haven't got through all of these, but I'm sure that between us we might be able to put together an emailed list of responses. Not putting words into your mouth there, Julia, but I hope we can do that.
No, actually, we've managed to get through lots, and thank you everyone for asking questions. There's actually a very, very quick one. Just if you could confirm for us, and it's from Mehdi, who's asked, is this similar to PBL, project-based learning? And I'm going to assume the answer, but I'll let you answer it briefly, John, and then I've just got a quick wrap-up for everybody after that.
Good. Yes, well, it is, of course, very similar to PBL. There are some differences. I mean, within PBL, there are different interpretations about how much project should be the basis of learning as opposed to an element within the program. And I think that what we have with IPQ is, shall I say, an opportunity to enter the PBL ocean, but not necessarily swim out of your depth. There are very exciting schools in the world where projects have become the single mode of all teaching and learning. That may be some way off for most of us, but the IPQ gives us a chance to begin to use this methodology, perhaps within a setting, and then to think about how that might affect other things we do within our school. And as I'm sure you'll appreciate, I'm an advocate of this as a mode of learning, and therefore I would encourage you to begin to use IPQ almost as the starting point, and then to think, okay, how can the lessons and the skills and the techniques that our children are using in this context, how can they be used to enrich their learning in other subjects? So it's PBL light, I suppose, is the answer to the question. Okay, so are we there, Julia?
Yes, I think so. There have been some questions. Stephen and Natalie and Zalika have asked how we register for moderator training. What I will do is I will ensure that everybody that is on this call gets an invitation to some training that you will be able to complete before certification takes place. So anybody that has already, and thank you very much for doing so, put pupils through this year, you will be certificated, and we will ensure that you get all the training you need before that happens. I've had a couple of questions about sending out example projects. And as I say, John and I are working very, very swiftly on creating lots of content for this. I know it's absolutely no excuse whatsoever, but I'm very new in post, and actually IPQ, as you can tell by it being the very first of all of these sessions, is a real priority for us because we've had so much interest. So look out for new content. We will be making sure that you get exemplar work, packs for teachers, packs for pupils, and obviously lots of lovely training from John and advice from people that have gone through the moderation and standardization training before. Then what that leads us to is, I'm just making sure I've answered everybody's, yes, certification. Please don't worry, anybody that is waiting to do their training, I will make sure you are contacted. So I think all that leads me to do is say thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for watching and for your patience where we've had any issues. As you can see, we've got people dialing in from all over the world. A huge, huge thanks to Darrell, our chair, for introducing everything so beautifully. To John, obviously, for being the real driving force behind this and an absolute expert in what he does. To Lauren, who was one of our wonderful pilot schools and a real champion for this. Will, who I know has done some brilliant projects over there at the Banda School. And Sarah, who is fulfilling wonderful boarding duties while we are here. So a huge thank you to all of you. And to those of you tuning in, if you are going to be dialing into any of our new CE specification sessions, we really look forward to seeing you. There is another one on Thursday, and do keep an eye out on our website or on Eventbrite. And thank you. Look, everybody's saying thank you online, so I think we should all wave goodbye and let everybody have a lovely evening. Thank you.